global plan to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. The CBD have issued what's called a non-paper, which is essentially the state of the negotiated text and the agreed brackets. Sorry. So it's kind of just the copy-paste of the text as it currently stands. It's called a non-paper, and it's available on their website if you're interested, the CBD website. So now I'll invite a couple of experts to provide some updates across critical areas of the negotiations. We have Lin Li, who is the Senior Director of Global Policy and Advocacy at WWF International. And Lin Li is going to speak about the overall ambition, 30 by 30, sustainable production and consumption, and the critical implementation mechanism. And then Andrew Deutz, who is Director of Global Policy and Conservation Finance at the Nature Conservancy, will speak about the very important finance and resource mobilization issues that are being discussed. And then I'll provide a bit of an update on Target 15, on the role of business in terms of mandatory assessment and disclosure, and then Target 18 on subsidies, as well as the role of business after COP15. So we have a bunch of things to whiz through, and then we can invite, of course, questions. I think one framing point is that we must make sure we do not fall into the same trap of the Aichi targets. We need this framework to bend the curve on biodiversity loss, as nature is our life source and this planet is our only home. We really want negotiators and the governments to adopt and deliver a Paris-style agreement that will catalyze immediate action to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. So Lin Li, over to you, a bit of a flavor on the process and what we can expect in the next day or two also. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. We all know today is the last day that most ministers will be on the ground after, being not able to meet in person for so long. And many behind-the-scenes conversations are going on at this moment as we're speaking. And this has to be the day that they reach agreement on the key issues that can bring a GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework, that can halt and reverse loss of nature, that be nature positive by 2030. We would be on the edge of something groundbreaking, truly groundbreaking, ambitious Paris-like agreement for nature, like Eva mentioned, to turn the tide on the biodiversity loss and transition our economics so that we work with and for nature, not against nature. Instead, life on this planet is being held hostage by countries that really focusing on short-term interests over a sustainable and healthy future for all. So let me clear that a weak GBF, a weak agreement, is unacceptable for people and the nature. The world is watching, and if governments don't step up, we won't forgive them, and nor our children, and not the voters coming next time to vote for them for coming up. So let's be focusing on a few elements, as Eva mentioned. First of all, on the elements around addressing humanity's footprint of production and consumption are at high risk. Despite the leadership and ambition shown by several ministers around the need to take transformative actions to address the footprint of production and consumption, you hear them from high-level statement. You can hear from them. We are very worried that the opposite is happening actually on the ground in the negotiations, where short-term economic specific interest from minority are risking to succeed in to ensuring that we have a world that can just continue. Sorry, the specific interests of a minority in the negotiation room are still focusing on the economic interest from, for a short gain to go for a business as usual future where we go, where we are heading. So the weakening of the language around action to tackle humanity's unsustainable footprint is defying science and prioritizing those out there that just want to continue do their business as usual. It is important to state, all is not lost yet. What matters are the decisions of ministers and the leadership of the presidency. So concerningly, unless things change today is really as the last day there on the ground, it is looking like we will be presented with a GBF that does not address the drivers of biodiversity loss. And then let's come into the conservation, at least 30%, conserving at least 30% of the planet by 2030. The target 3 is not standalone. It needs to be really seen in synergy with others, including addressing the drivers of biodiversity loss, to effectively deliver the conservation outcomes. The text remains largely bracketed on the numbers or the minimum percentage of the numbers, and this may not be discussed until the last day of COP, which is the plenary last day of COP. So it's really risky if we don't get the numbers or minimum percentage agreed before actually at the last moment. The latest round of negotiation, including the disagreement around the inclusion of indigenous people traditional territories. So we WWF thinking that indigenous traditional territory is that it is that recognized of their effort towards conservation effort. So only those conservation effective management of those indigenous people traditional territories that deliver the conservation outcomes should be considered. So although all is not decided until it's decided, we also want to share one celebration that we have is that we like to celebrate that the brackets on the respecting the rights of indigenous people and the community have been lifted. So we have hope there. Now let's talk about implementation. A strong implementation mechanism is critical to the success of post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And we learned from our REC failure that implementation not step up, we don't deliver the outcome we set to deliver. Implementation of GBF must start right away, immediately after COP15. The negotiations on the implementation mechanism have made some progress, but there are still 2 issues where still need agreement from all parties and for which we have significant concerns. First one is parties must agree on a clear timetable for the implementation of GBF between COP15 and 2030. With this, with the framework covers some of the key dates for producing new biodiversity plans, stronger national reports are still being discussed, and with options that would jeopardize the timely implementation of the framework. An ambitious timetable must be agreed at COP15 to give governments clarity about what will be expected of them over the coming decade. The second, we're also concerned about the lack of clear signal for parties to increase action over time. Which we call it ratcheting. Basically, when we assess progress is not enough, we need to really increase the action so that we can really catch up what we have not delivered. At this moment, reference to the ratcheting of the implementation in the text are weak, with only an encouragement for countries to take action if implementation is insufficient. That must be made much stronger. Encourage is not enough. We need to require. In closing, let me close here that here in Montreal, we are not only at the risk of sleepwalking into making the same mistakes as we did in our REC targets. Worse, we are seeing sustained attempts of ending up with a global biodiversity agreement that is less ambitious than what is in 12 years ago. In the face of an accelerating climate and nature crisis and also intertwined related crisis, this is both unacceptable and, quite frankly, using the words of UN Secretary General, suicidal. We need an ambitious deal that holds countries account. Spatial conservation, like 30 by 30, is very critical. That alone is not enough. We need countries to commit to action to tackle the drivers of biodiversity loss, including our broken food systems, and ambition bring ambition across the board, and including financing, and you will hear more, and a consensus on a strong implementation mechanism to hold countries to account. Unless ministers make significant progress today, the negotiation will reach the point of no return, resulting in a weak deal for nature. We need to see countries working hard to bridge the divide. We see over 145 countries already signed up to the ambition through their Glasgow Forest Leaders Declaration, through the Leaders Pledge for Nature, through the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and the People. They must step up There's no time left.
Thanks so much, Lin Li. We're going to move straight on to Andrew so that we also have a bit of time for questions. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Again, I'm Andrew Deutz with the Nature Conservancy. Our Canadian affiliate is Nature United. So I'm cautiously optimistic at this point that we have a way forward on finance. And I'm looking at how the discussions are going and the potential landing zones there on a couple of key issues are starting to be clarified. But I'll point out that there's a relationship between the level of ambition on finance and the level of ambition on commitments, right? They have to move in tandem. If we get higher ambition on finance, there's confidence that we can get higher ambition on the conservation and sustainable use outcomes, and vice versa. They move together. Right now, I think we've got some positive signals that we're heading towards, we can see a clear pathway to a success on level of ambition on both finance and the commitments. The key issue that everyone's concerned about right now is around what's happening on the ODA target, right? The Overseas Development Assistance. How much money are developed countries putting on the table for developing countries? We saw a really good signal the other day when there was basically an exercise to tally up all of the new commitments that have been put on the table over the last 18 months while this process has been going on. They add up to something like $7 billion in new resource commitments from developed countries to help drive this process forward. That's almost close to a doubling of the current ODA baseline from 2020 going forward. So that's a really positive signal. I would call it a down payment on the quick start finance that we need to see to help developing countries implement this commitment. Now, we need more. We still don't have a target in the text, so hopefully we're going to see that come out today if we're going to get the deal done. But that card needs to be played now so we can clarify the negotiations. I'd like to see a level of ambition here higher than what was achieved in the Aichi targets. They called for a doubling of ODA by the middle of the decade and then maintenance thereafter. I mean, I think here we're clearly headed for a doubling by the middle of the decade, but then I'd really challenge the donor countries to commit to a further target by 2030 to be determined over the course of the next 2 years. The Climate Convention has agreed that it's got its $100 billion target and it is the process of setting a new target higher than that by 2025. I think this process can move in parallel. We can get a strong target for 2025 and move even higher than that. Hopefully we can get there, but the signals seem positive. The other big issue that's getting a lot of attention in the resource mobilization discussions is whether or not we need a new fund and what that should look like. And again, I'm seeing hopeful signs that we're heading towards a compromise. I'll note, though, that the biggest issue isn't how many funds or how many mechanisms we have, it's how much money is there. If you think about that pitcher of water at the end of the table, what matters is how much water is in the pitcher, not how many glasses we pour it into. So we think the biggest issue is that there's more money on the table, not just 1 or 2 or 3 more funds. That said, we do think there's some compromise coming out where we'd be creating a new fund within the family of funds managed by the Global Environment Facility. That has the advantage of it does establish a new fund, which can have some new rules, increasing access, be open to many more sources of money going in, and much more flexible uses of the money going out if it can be so designed. So the countries that want a new fund could declare victory. The countries that are concerned about the transaction costs and the fact that it took 5 years to establish the Green Climate Fund would at least be able to say, well, we have an existing governance structure under the Global Environment Facility. And because of the timing of the GEF Council and the GEF Assembly this year, it could be set up and operational within a year. The GEF has been able to establish new funds that quickly in the past. So we could reduce the transaction costs. So again, sort of a win for the countries that are concerned about the amount of time and effort that would be spent negotiating a new fund rather than actually getting things done on the ground. So I think there's a compromise there that's coming up. 2 other quick points. It's not just about the ODA, right? We're looking at if a doubling of ODA is on the table, that's another $10 billion. It's a lot of money, but we're trying to close a $700 billion gap. So we need all the elements there. So I'm also kind of excited that there was some further movement on the 10-point plan on biodiversity finance. We've now got over 40 countries endorsing what is essentially a comprehensive plan for resource mobilization that looks at what the donor countries need to do, what all countries need to do around domestic resources, and around subsidy reform, around what the private sector can do on aligning private sector flows, and around philanthropy, what the multilateral development banks and the IMF need to do. So we've got a comprehensive package out there and I think a vision of what it's going to take. And then there was a lot of excitement last night with the launch of the NBSAP Accelerator, which is basically a partnership to help countries implement. The two weaknesses of the Aichi framework when we came out was there wasn't enough money on the table and there wasn't enough implementation going on. So I'm positive that we're seeing some really strong signals and excitement about more money and partnerships to accelerate implementation. Those are critical. So again, I can see a pathway to success. It could go either way, but we can see a clear pathway to success.
Thanks so much, Andrew. So just to complement what you've heard in terms of the business side, so Target 15 and the role of business, as you hopefully know, hundreds of businesses have come to COP15 with a clear ask for governments to make it mandatory for large companies and financial institutions to assess and disclose their impacts and dependencies on nature. This global biodiversity framework has the opportunity, it has to make a difference and go beyond voluntary actions. There was a business forum a few days ago, and we're hearing all the right examples of companies assessing, disclosing, acting, transforming their businesses, which is really commendable, but it's not enough. We need now the Global Biodiversity Framework to take the next step and give that political certainty that companies, especially the large ones, will be required to assess, disclose, and ultimately act to reverse nature loss by 2030. Now, in terms of the text and what's being negotiated, we can tell that the governments and the negotiators are now listening to this call from business and are seriously considering the inclusion of mandatory assessment and disclosure in Target 15. The text, as it stands, already provides a really strong signal of the direction of travel. As of this morning, the word mandatory is still in brackets, but the text is collectively very strong, and most countries so far have expressed support. So we really welcome this positive momentum and hope and expect a good outcome, given that now nearly 400 companies have supported the Make It Mandatory campaign. We should add, though, that it must be complemented by a clear aim to reduce negative impacts by 50% by 2030, and that numerical target of the reduction of 50% is still in brackets. And we also need to make sure that the positive impacts are included there as well. Great. So then in terms of Target 18, which is on the environmentally harmful subsidies, this is also one that leading businesses support because that reform is essential for them to reach their own sustainability goals. There are still brackets in the text on the word eliminate. So eliminate environmentally harmful subsidies. There is reform. There's also brackets around the numerical target to reduce subsidies by at least 500 billion, and also brackets around the scaling up positive incentives. And so, again, as Andrew was saying, our message is that we cannot disconnect the ambition from the finance, and subsidy reform is necessary to reach the right level of ambition in the framework. As one important stat for you to be aware of the scale of this environmentally harmful subsidies, $1.8 trillion each year spent on subsidies that unintentionally harm the environment. That's equivalent to 2% of GDP. And without that word eliminate, which is still in brackets, we're actually lowering the ambition compared to the Aichi target. So it's really important we get the numerical target in there too, so that it helps track progress as well. One final point then on business action post COP15 is that clearly companies are showing up here because they finally recognize their role and responsibility to contribute to a nature positive world, but they also need to move from being part of the problem to part of the solution. If the message coming out already is, if you're not already doing so, you should be preparing as businesses to transform your business, and indeed entire sectors and value chains need to start accounting for the true value of nature in their decision making and their disclosure, because countries are preparing to require business and finance to assess and disclose. So based on the negotiations so far, if I was running a business right now, I would be getting ready to assess, disclose, and act now on nature at scale. So whatever happens in the next 24 hours, we all need to act, and the status quo is over. Now is the time to be courageous. So we have a few minutes now to open for some questions. We'll take a couple maybe and then answer this. So I have one in the back over there and then in the front. Okay, there are 4 questions. Yes, at the back, thank you.
This is a question for Eve. Or
Please
Eva.
could you, hi, could you please introduce
Yeah,
yourself?
my name is Celia. I'm from the Public Broadcasting Corporation in Catalonia, in Spain. And I just want to know, when you talk about mandatory disclosures, how is that possible? I mean, what does it mean in practical? I've seen that there are really big companies who have signed for this manifesto, Inditex, H&M, Nestle, Danone. What are they going to do, really? I mean, because sometimes this is just like greenwashing. And what does it mean? And besides that, what about bio offsets or trade-offs? I mean, what is the reality of this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take one more question. I think I saw your hand first, and then we'll take you 2 afterwards. Here in the front, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Daniela.
Thank you. Daniela Chiaretti from the Valor Econômico Brazil. It's a question for Andrew about the trust fund under Jeff. So 2 things, if I may. One is Jeff is not under the authority of the COP15. So how do you see this? And also there are some countries wanting to put DSI under this Jeff trust. And so how do you see that also? And third thing, the United States is the biggest donor of the Jeff today, and the United States is not a part of the convention. So, yeah, how? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll quickly respond to those ones. It's an excellent question. The way mandatory assessment and disclosure is then implemented as all the targets is at a national level. And so that means that within structures normally already existing for other ways for companies to disclose impacts, for example, on climate, we could then extend that within different, it could be financial services or whatever authority there is within a country. It could be extended beyond climate disclosure regulation to then include other environmental impacts. And so what is important to know is that there are existing frameworks in place at a global level that will support companies in how they assess and disclose. There's the Science-Based Targets for Nature methodology and the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure that is under development. These will be available next year, finalized, they're already in draft form, but ultimately will be at a national level. In terms of offsetting, that's also a really important point, and the potential of greenwash. This is not a taboo topic. We need to open this up and understand clearly what we're talking about. And part of the reason of making it mandatory is to be able to have access to that information, because when it's voluntary, there is less control of the information that is coming in and out, and it's not as consistent. What we need is for then governments to be asking for the right information, including where the reductions have been, and that cannot be that cannot be replaced by then just only talking about offsetting or other credits. In Target 15, we really need to reduce by 50% the negative impacts, and that's a strong element to report on. Andrew?
So you ask a lawyer 3 questions about the legal authority of the JEF, and I'll try and make this short. So, but to be quick, the JEF is the implementing mechanism of the financial mechanism of the convention. There is a COP decision at every COP giving guidance to the JEF on what the COP expects it to do to help implement the convention, right? So there is a formal communication and accountability mechanism between the JEF and the COP. So that helps. In terms of the potential revenue stream that might come out on DSI, on digital sequencing information. It is likely that we're headed for some kind of a hybrid solution where countries that have a national system around access and benefit sharing would maintain that. Countries that don't would establish a multilateral benefit sharing mechanism that could potentially generate revenue, but it could go into the same trust fund. So there's the part of the idea of designing a new trust fund under the GEF is to have it open to multiple sources. If there's some revenue stream that comes from digital sequencing information utilization, that it could also be open to philanthropy. It could also be open to the private sector, which the current GEF trust fund is not, right? So the idea is to create a more flexible mechanism that would allow multiple sources of funding to come in and be much more creative about how that money goes out and potentially be able to achieve much greater leverage to the private sector, like we're seeing with the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. So this would hopefully be something that is much more flexible than what we have, that's learned the lessons of what's out there. And then lastly, the fact that the US is not a party to the convention means they could be inside or outside this new mechanism. And it's a question of if they want to put money in, they'd want to be in the governance structure. But you could create a subset of the GEF Council. The US sits on the GEF Council over the GEF. You could create a separate structure that excludes the US, in which case the US wouldn't put money in. But as this is meant to be a new fund specifically targeted to help countries implement the GBF, if you wanted the US in, you'd want them on the governance, but then their money would be going to implementing the GBF. But my point is, like, all of those options are on the table. There are no barriers to those issues being sorted out constructively. And again, this could, in theory, be operational by the end of 2023.
Thanks so much, Andrew. We are at time. So what I would say, if I can ask the people who wanted questions, maybe we can just meet behind in the back. Is that okay if you have a few minutes? Yeah. And thank you so much. We're available to follow up. Thank you.